It's a pleasure to be invited to be part of the workshop today. One never knows if it's a good thing to go first or if you want to go later in the program. One of the benefits, of course, of being one of the first speakers is that hopefully everybody's awake for the most part. You haven't gotten tired yet, and you have the energy to pay attention to most of the, what would be said. For some other people like myself who are less of a morning person, I actually prefer to present sometimes later. So hopefully my thoughts will be clear and coherent through the presentation. The title of the presentation is Machine Learning. Is it the panacea for all kinds of cybersecurity threats? If you read, whether it's technical material, whether you look at the media, the popular media, wherever you look in the literature, there's been a huge upsurge in the discussion, the research in the area of cybersecurity and machine learning. And for some, you may think that really, if we can solve and apply machine learning in all its context to the diversity of problems in cybersecurity, it would solve everything. I won't give away my whole talk, but I think, the title is phrased as a question. The answer, in many ways, from my worldview anyway, is that machine learning is one of the pillars that has tremendous potential to assist us in the cybersecurity world. It is not the be-all and it is not the end-all, but is a very important one in this space. And if you look at the variety of companies that have been built and developed just in the last 3-4 years, the amounts of funding that they have gotten, it's certainly an area that is attracting tremendous attention. I should give a caveat that, I look around the room and I see a lot of distinguished folks here with strong background in the area of, in the academic area, in cybersecurity, in machine learning. I come from the worldview of somebody in industry. I'm not a professor. I don't have a strong mathematics background in the area of the algorithms of machine learning, but we have some perspective that we've developed at Solana Networks over the last 14, 15 years working in the area of cybersecurity and in trying to actually implement some of these algorithms to detect some of the challenges that are faced. Okay, some of these charts are from here and there. Some are older, some are newer. The world of cybersecurity has changed as we know it. And, you look at whether it's the news, whether it's research, there's cybersecurity threats, all over the place. And these are just newspaper clippings from, they're actually a few years old now. But, you had one case where, you had a botnet of sorts, let's call it in the Dalai Lama's office. And I don't know if some of the folks involved in that are here. You have countries that have been besieged with DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, such that their essential infrastructure is knocked offline. You have criminal elements that are involved in this area. You have a diversity of cybersecurity attackers of different kinds, all the way from those who are not very experienced to those who are very sophisticated, to state actors, to criminal elements. There is a strong diversity of this in this area. This is another one from a few years ago. Just botnets were something that were quite, in the media, where you had suddenly a large number of computers around the world under the control of one or more particular botnets. Mariposa was one of the bigger ones, maybe not the biggest necessarily, but that's 12 million hosts under their control all over the place. And this is really a scale that is unimaginable maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago in the cybersecurity space. So the challenges that we face, began to cause everybody who's working in this space to look at new ways of addressing the problem. The traditional means that had been used to detect cybersecurity threats and to defend the network against these threats were no longer sufficient. So it's instructive just to spend 1 or 2 minutes looking at how cybersecurity has evolved over the years. And, you know, if I just take myself back, I haven't been around in the industry as long as some of the folks in this room in the security area, but I see folks who've been working in this area for a very, very long time. But, you know, I remember, let's go back 25 years. At the time, maybe the main security challenge were, let's call them email viruses, and many of them came out of one particular country at that time. And this was really the maximum challenge that was faced. You know, we're talking about a period of time where there were maybe 100,000 endpoints on the internet. You know, this is around 1990, give or take. Some of the algorithms that are the foundation of the underpinnings of the internet that we know today, some of them had reached an important point in their evolution. Things like congestion control algorithms and things like that. And so the internet was just beginning to become something that would move out of academia, the military, and into more popular usage. I remember, you know, my first job going to my manager, and I had an email address at the university. I'd graduated, and I was working in a particular company in town, BNR. And I went to my manager, and one of the first things I did was I said, well, can I have an email address? My manager looked at me, and he sort of looked around a little bit, and he looked down. You know, I was a new grad. He was probably trying to be encouraging, but he then kind of said, well, you know, that fellow over there is the only one in our group who has email. Maybe you can borrow his email address from time to time. So this was the state of affairs, you know, about 25 years ago. There weren't a lot of users on the net. And I eventually got my own email address, but it took quite a bit of time and persuasion, because I didn't need it for work. I really just wanted an email address because I had one before. And there was no strong utility at that time for everyone in the company to have an external email. Internal email addresses in BNR had been around for a long time, but external email, for example, was something new, and very select people had that. So as the number of users on the internet has exploded, as the number of devices have exploded, so also the opportunities for malicious actors have exploded. And where the threats one day may have been a simple email virus, they're not so simple anymore, or a worm, you know, you have malware, you have infected websites, you have botnets, phishing, spam, DDoS attacks. You have cybersecurity attacks on critical infrastructure, you know, like the electrical grid, water resources, the manufacturing sector. You have, you know, what we call APT, or advanced persistent threats, or targeted attacks. You have nation states. You have all kinds of... The cybersecurity problem is no longer the problem of just attacking someone's end computer at home. It spans all sectors, it spans all industries, and it spans all countries and all devices. And the challenge, you know, is one that is going to become more pronounced as we move to the world where, first of all, everybody has these small devices, you know. These devices are all connected to the network using the same protocols that the regular internet was built on, IP networking. Those protocols are open. They are no longer closed as they may have been in earlier years. And so this, and coupled with the fact that you have this IoT phenomenon, or this phenomenon that Internet of Things, where different devices in your home, for example, or anywhere else may be connected to the network, may be remotely controlled. All of these expose a range of cybersecurity challenges and opportunities for people who are seeking to exploit them. So the job of detecting security threats and the job of actually having solutions to defend the network becomes very important, much more so than before, and the scale of the problem becomes even more challenging. I don't know how many of you, maybe I can ask this as a question. How many people in the room would remember the Morris worm? So this is the story of Robert Morris, who, by the way, is a professor right now at MIT, a very bright individual who was, the founder of one of the very successful startups, in the early, mid-90s, we'd call it. But really, that's not his initial claim to fame, as much as he would like. Robert Morris was a student in MIT, a very bright student, who built probably one of the first worms that at least has made it into the folklore. And without going into a lot of detail, this was a time, again, when probably there were, 60, 70, 80,000 nodes on the internet. Not much more than that. My numbers may not be exact, but that's the scale. And he essentially wrote this piece of software that pretty much brought that network or connected set of networks to its knees. This piece of software would exploit the end systems, install itself on other computers, constantly install multiple copies, defeat the individuals who were trying, who could detect it and try to delete it. It had a number of characteristics that are common in today's cybersecurity problem. And he hadn't done this maliciously necessarily, or for financial gain, or for any other purpose. He may have been bored. He may have been working towards his thesis. I don't know. There's all kinds of stories, and he's been pretty humble about it since then. He hasn't sought media attention. But he developed one of the very first worms as far back as 1988. He subsequently went on to do his PhD at Harvard in a very important area in networking, and is now a professor at MIT. So, I think we don't want to discredit him. But some of the methods and techniques that people have been using to attack applications and infrastructure in the internet, I just wanted to point out that they date back a very long time, even if the specifics have changed. He was exploiting problems in Finger, if you remember, for those of you who remember Unix systems, Finger, send mail, things like that. But the nature of some of these problems, at the heart of it, from a networking perspective, some of it has changed, for sure, have become more sophisticated. Some of it remains fundamentally the same in terms of the approaches. So what was the historical approach to cyber defense, to defending your network? And this is very simple. For the security practitioners in the room who go out there and do audits and assessments, they give you a long list of things you have to do to defend your network today. But conceptually, if you think about it, I just sort of said, there's three things that historically you would think of. And you can draw parallels with other areas. But you secure your perimeter. If you have a network, a group of people who are connected through devices, you want to secure the perimeter so that, let's call them the bad guys, can't break in. So that's kind of conceptually one area. You also secure your last line of defense. And this is your desktops at the time, let's say. You want to secure your desktop so that if someone does manage to break in, however it is, you've got antivirus software on the desktop or malware detection that detects the security threats that, somehow you either through email or any other form have made it to your desktop. And then again, also you would secure key parts of the infrastructure. Email servers, DNS or domain name service servers, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these key parts of your infrastructure you would secure. And so in this context, you had, I'll call it a limited number of areas that you would defend against cyber threats. You defend at the perimeter, you defend on the end host, you defend a few key places. And that was really the approach in cybersecurity network defense for a long time. This is really, as we know, not an approach that can, follow on as it is in its totality. And it has evolved tremendously since then, but the problem is going to become even more challenging. Why is it changing? So these are just a few examples, but there's many more. these devices, these bring your own devices, are one of the challenges. These devices may be owned by an organization, they may not be owned by. Many organizations allow people to connect with their own devices to the network. The number of security threats on mobile devices is increasing, but it's only going to increase in greater numbers with time. For a large time, a lot of the security threats were focused on Windows-based platforms, and other operating systems did not have as many attacks just because of the sheer number of users. The number of security threats in Linux-based systems were fewer. With the advent of things like, let's say, these mobile devices, that category of threats has been on the increase. It will continue to increase, in my own opinion, in greater numbers going forward. And it's an area that has to be of tremendous focus. The telecommuting and distributed workforce. In some cases, in a lot of cases, people are using home computers to connect to the network. Some organizations give the remote worker a work computer, but many allow people to use their own computers at home to connect. This paradigm, as the number of remote workers and teleworkers increases, exponentially, not exponentially, but it also increases the problem. The cloud, of course, as more and more applications move into the cloud, there's an entire different area that you need to secure that's under someone else's control, essentially, for the most part. The human factor. I put unsophisticated users, but that may be myself, on a busy day, emails are coming in on the fly. Generally, you try not to click on things that look funny, but, maybe once in a while, in that moment of doing things quickly, you do click. The same way you maybe run a red light without thinking sometimes, or all those other things that we do. So whether unsophisticated users or sophisticated users who are busy, the human factor, is a huge one. My parents got a call, I put them in the category of unsophisticated users, got a call about 2-3 months ago from somebody, saying they were from Microsoft. And ultimately they had a piece of malware that was on their computer that was a problem, and started giving all kinds of information on the phone to the person, and I don't think they're alone. There's many people who fall in that category of users. And so this is a tremendous challenge, because no matter how strong the technical solutions, if the human factor remains as it is, a lot of threats begin to appear on the network. That is one of the first things that needs to be worked on in terms of education in all kinds of organizations. So, looking at all this, if one looks out there, businesses are spending, the IT security budgets, some would say they're not where they should be just yet, in terms of the money that organizations spend on trying to secure their networks. Those of us in the security field would say probably the budget should be higher. But organizations are spending quite a bit of money compared to what they were, 10, 15, 20 years ago on IT security. You have intrusion detection systems, very sophisticated IDS systems, which monitor the network traffic and aim to detect different types of threats or intrusions on the network. You have firewalls, which are deployed initially used to be just at the perimeter of the network, the entry point, the gateway. And now in some organizations, firewalls that are many layers deep. You have a network architecture that is layered and maybe layers of firewalls. So you have these, and you have next generation firewalls that are looking at the traffic, detecting threats, trying to block them. You have endpoint security systems that have evolved tremendously since the early days when you had just antivirus software running on your desktop. You have security incident and event management systems that collect data from a range of security sensors around the network and try to correlate that data, pull it together for the security analyst to be able to look at it. You've got a range of different tools. These tools in and of themselves need complementary solutions to do their work. They don't protect against a number of things. And when I say they don't protect, that's not to say that these solutions should be thrown out. These solutions are the underpinnings of security today, network security, and they're very important cornerstone in the security of an organization. But there are additional things that are needed. You know, when you deploy a firewall at the perimeter, or when you deploy a firewall maybe one or two, you know, in a couple of layers in the network, it doesn't see certain kinds of traffic. Generally, it's looking at the traffic that's, could call it north-south, in and out of the organization. It doesn't see traffic that's exchanged inside the network. So, you know, horizontal or lateral traffic, as it's called. It doesn't see if you have a mobile device that you connect anywhere in the network, or if somebody connects a wireless access point just, you know, in some part of the network, the traffic generated by these devices may not be seen by the firewalls or the intrusion detection systems because they're not monitoring that particular point. So we need to be able to monitor more and more points in the network to gain a broader coverage in terms of the security threat. This is at least from the point of view of network security monitoring. And I should put a caveat in there. You know, my background in security is not in crypto, as I'm, you know, I come to security from a networking perspective. So it's in the area of network security and network security monitoring. And so a lot of my comments are tainted by that bias, probably. You know, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's one pillar in the security solution. So, and I'm not sure of the background in the room. Maybe I just ask a few questions. When we talk about some of the folks who are very familiar with this space get tired of the discussion on signature-based systems and machine learning. So I just want to do a quick poll of the room. How many individuals in the room would say that they're very familiar with signature-based approach to cybersecurity? Okay, so there's a mixture in the room. We'll go over this, you know, in some, without going into too much detail, but we'll give it some coverage. Majority of a lot of the cybersecurity solutions that we talked about, you know, the slide before, rely on signature-based systems at the end of the day. And it doesn't matter whether it's antivirus software, malware detection, firewall, intrusion detection. Conceptually, the approach is the same. You have researchers, you know, whether working for security companies, whether working in academia, vendors, practitioners. You have researchers who, when they see a new kind of attack, they try to figure out the signature of that attack. And that, you know, refers to a number of things. These signatures are encoded and stored in what we'll call, at a high level, a database. Some kind of storage where you can encode the signature that represents attack A versus attack B versus attack C. You know, you can think of it as a table, right? Whatever tool you have then monitors the traffic and aims to simply carry out a pattern matching exercise. It's trying to see, where do I see this signature in my traffic? And so it's really, at the end of the day, some kind of a pattern matching exercise. It can be a simple pattern matching exercise. It can be a complicated one, maintaining lots of state. And then they typically have some kind of a policy where, you know, if there's a match, they raise an alarm, they raise a flag, they send an alert, they maybe in some cases they block the traffic. So they carry out some kind of action based on detection of the threat. And the technique is the same. You know, if you have, again, let's revert back to antivirus software. Let's say something that's scanning your email. It's searching the email for, let's say, the attachments to the email, for example, for these kinds of patterns. If you're looking in network traffic, it's looking at bits and bytes, maybe in packets or across packets. You know, it really doesn't matter what kind of application you have or what, at the end of the day, all of these signature-based approaches, somebody's gone out and said, I've characterized this threat to have this particular behavior. This set of, and this behavior means it's generating this type of traffic, either application layer traffic or network layer traffic. And you try to then detect that going forward. So this is what really the signature-based systems are doing. The challenge with this approach, there's a number of challenges, but I mean, 4 of them are just listed. Depending on what it is, it can take time to figure out, for the researchers to figure out the signature. In some cases, they figure out the signature within minutes or hours. You know, the first set of folks to get their hands on that, on the malware, for example. But in some cases, it takes longer. In some of the more, you know, difficult attacks, it takes longer to figure out what the signature is. But there's a second problem. Even if you figure out what the signature is, you have to get those signatures out to the deployed field. You have to get it out to the devices that are already deployed so that they can use those signatures in their activity to block malicious traffic. Now, in some cases, you know, like, I don't know, my home computer, it constantly seems to be updating and pushing stuff to it, right? So it's pretty quick to get the deployed signatures. But in some other networks, especially large organizations, let's say enterprise networks, financial sector, government, all kinds of organizations, there are very tight policies around updating software on the network and signatures. It's rolled out very carefully, it's planned, it's tested even ahead of time. That whole process could take anywhere from, you know, in a network with 50,000 users, could take anywhere from 2 months to 8 months. And this is from real world experience. So there is a lag. And then of course you have zero-day, so-called zero-day attacks, you know, new attacks for which you don't have signatures, and you know, you need some kind of mechanism in that area. And finally, number 4, encrypted traffic. And there's some interesting stats that I sort of tried to find the latest stats, but encryption is a challenge for all of these signature-based systems. When you have encrypted traffic, the part of the packet beyond the IP header, as we would call it, or beyond, in some cases, beyond the MAC layer, you know, is encrypted. And once that's encrypted, signature-based systems can't do any pattern matching. They really can't do their job. So you need to rely on something else. And the volume of encrypted traffic is increasing. Just some quick stats about the challenges that I mentioned in the previous slide. And you can find, depending where you look, you can find different kind of stats. So, you know, this is one example. The 2017 report from FireEye, you know, they mentioned that you know, they do this annual study. In their study, the median time for organizations to detect security threats from the time of compromise to discovery, in their study anyway, was 99 days. And this is not uncommon. If you look at any one of these studies from a range of people out there, you know, it's not 2 and 3 and 5 days. The median time is high. So the question is, what is, you know, this piece of software doing on your network in that time? And you know, was it dormant? Did it cause some damage? So anything that can be done to shrink that time can bring tremendous value. This business of deploying signatures in the field. You know, what a number of researchers have characterized this, not recent, it's going back quite a few years, but they've characterized this as a cyber arms race. You have, you know, cyber attackers who are developing new threats. You have the cyber defenders who are quickly working to figure out the signatures, deploy them, defend against the network. They say, great, we figured this one out. It takes a while for the signatures to be deployed out into the field. In the meantime, the attackers have developed new threats, and they become more sophisticated, and the cycle just keeps repeating itself. There's a study from Kaspersky. Again, pick your favorite AV vendor. Kaspersky is not necessarily in the best light nowadays, but you know, one of their studies says that they detect 325,000 new malware files each day. That seems a little bit high to me, but assume it's correct. Whatever it is, it's a big number for all the vendors in that space. And their study shows that only 2 to 10% of these malware files are changing from iteration to iteration. So a machine learning approach, for example, that can figure out that change and flag it would bring tremendous efficiency to the work of the researchers instead of trying to figure out a new signature each time. So these are areas where machine learning, for example, can help. Okay, so I sort of mentioned that if malicious traffic is encrypted, then signature-based systems have challenges. And there's a number of areas you can look at for this. A lot of this malware, the more sophisticated kinds, are under the control of some kind of central command and control server. There's some centralized server somewhere that all of these, we'll call them bots, but all these pieces of malware are under the control of that central server. Many of them have the intelligence now that if they get disconnected, they can work on their own. But at the end of the day, they have some communication and direction from the server. It used to be that the channel of communication between the two in the early versions was not encrypted. Nowadays, more and more, that communication channel is encrypted. So if you want to detect it, it's a challenge using signature-based methods. Other methods would be needed. And of course, there's delivery of infected malware via TLS or SSL. And depending which studies you read, as much as 50% of the traffic on the net is encrypted. It seems a little bit high to me, but I think that those are the numbers I saw most recently. Whatever it is, more and more of the traffic is being encrypted. So this challenge of being able to recognize what the underlying traffic is within the encrypted set is an important problem to be solved. And it doesn't matter whether you want to do this for threat detection or even just for things like application, determining which apps are running within the encrypted traffic. So, machine learning. Does it solve all the problems? I'll give you my own bias at this point. As I mentioned, I don't think it solves all the problems. You need all the existing solutions that we have in place. Machine learning has tremendous potential to broaden the scope of the security coverage, especially in light of the increasing number of devices and security threats that we would face going forward. Although if you look at the amount of funding that startups with machine learning are getting, one would think that this is really going to solve world hunger because the amounts of funding are staggering. I didn't put a chart on that, but it's really, this is a very hot area in our space. So, at the heart of, at the heart of it, what is machine learning in this context? In the context of network security monitoring, at the end of the day, the signature-based systems in many cases are dealing with known threats. They're telling you about known threats. So what we're looking for are the threats that are not known and not covered by the other systems. This is where machine learning has tremendous potential in the network security monitoring world. And really, in some case, it's akin to the problem of picking out the red apple from the green apple. Pretty simple problem, right? You open your eyes and you spot the red apple. Well, our experience in the last many years has shown that it's actually a very complicated and difficult and challenging problem. We've spent a lot of time on different algorithms, real network traffic traces, real networks, and there are strong elements of success, but clearly this is an area of continued research and work. So, machine learning, of course, is used in different industries. The math behind machine learning is not new. It's been around, I don't know, the academics will tell you, 40 years, 50 years in many cases. It's used in the financial fraud sector, medical imaging, a range of other sectors. It's really, as we know, the convergence of computing power, memory, open source availability. It's the convergence of a number of important factors in technology that have made machine learning available for use in cybersecurity on a wide scale and at a cost that's affordable, both for the organizations and for the vendors who are using it. So at the heart of it, all of these algorithms, in the context again of network security monitoring, they try to learn a baseline of what is normal behavior. They try to figure out what are the green apples in that picture. That's the first thing they try to do. What are the set of traffic behavior, you know, in our case, that one would consider normal and regular? And then, once you've been able to do that, you then try to find deviations from the norm, things that are anomalous, things that are different from that regular pattern of behavior. And the hope there then is that you can detect those other kinds of threats on the network that are not caught by the signature-based approaches. Certain kinds of botnets, some botnets would be caught by signature-based systems, especially the noisier ones. Some would not. Things that remain dormant on a computer, malware that's dormant and doesn't do much apart from phoning home periodically, you know, sending a message periodically to the central command and control. Surreptitious network scans, all kinds of things. You know, the best defense, of course, is to be able to, well, defense number one is not even to let any kind of malware get installed on your network. You know, not to fall to phishing exercises or anything else. That's the best defense. But if you do happen to, you know, to fall victim to that, then you need to have recourse to other things. And that's where network security monitoring comes in. So, you know, the range of tools in the cybersecurity kit for any organization are many. And this is not comprehensive. This is intended just to list some of them. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's antivirus software, malware analysis software, firewalls, intrusion detection, security incident and event management, sandbox, spam detection. All of them, and it doesn't matter which vendor you look at, all of them either have or claim to have or are working on or will have some kind of machine learning capability built in. They are all looking to augment their existing capabilities with some machine learning. I shouldn't say all, many of them. Now, not all solutions are created equal, and why is that? Well, you know, you can think of the scenario, which, you know, is not too far from reality, where the cyber attackers begin to leverage machine learning themselves to create security threats and attacks. You know, and I don't think we've seen a lot of this so far, but this surely must be coming in the horizon. Machine learning, which was the domain of very specialized folks, is more and more becoming something that is becoming, it's not yet something that anybody, you know, in IT or software or networking would know, but it's moving in that direction. Right now, data scientists are in hot demand. For those, any grad students here, you probably know that. But, you know, these algorithms, the algorithms are available in open source packages. The tools more and more are becoming available. It's not mainstream. It's moving towards that direction. And, you know, it will be used more and more. Okay, so when you want to apply machine learning to detect security threats, what do you have to do? There's a number of things, but, you know, there's 4 key decisions in our case that we face. Number one, you know, which algorithm do you use? Or do you say, I'm not going to pick a particular algorithm. I'm just going to throw data at this, and I'm going to use a bunch of different algorithms and see what I get. This is one approach that certainly some people seem to be doing. But certainly there needs to be some conscious decision about which algorithms one uses, because there's different algorithms for machine learning, as we know, and, you know, how are they used? The second question, what do I apply, you know, what data do I apply this on? Am I applying this, you know, to Active Directory queries? Am I applying it to DNS queries, to log queries, to flow data, to packet streams? There's a range of different kinds of data that this can be applied on, and all of them have merit. different vendors will apply it to different kinds of data. In our case, we're applying it to network flow data. Question number 3, do you go with a supervised or unsupervised learning approach? The supervised one, I think, is the one that most folks are familiar with, relies on a lot of training information. You have a training data set which you've somehow gathered and which you then use later on to actually try and apply against your real data set to detect threats. Unsupervised learning is where you don't have that training data set, and there's an area in between, semi-supervised. Finally, and I think this is actually the most difficult of the 4 problems, what features? Features are the inputs to the machine learning. One can think of them in the network traffic monitoring world. You take your traffic, your bytes or your flows, and you distill a certain set of statistics out of them, conceptually. And these form the features that would be the machine learning would run on. So it's it sounds like a simple problem, but it's actually a very important one because different sets of features tell you and can help you detect different types of threats. So in terms of the algorithm, this is just a picture from Scikit, which is one of the open source packages, Python-based, that makes a number of machine learning approaches available. You can see that there's different algorithms in there that are being used, and each one for different purposes. Sorry, I was giving a 5-minute notice, so I think I have to run through the rest of my presentation. These algorithms, I think the main, this is just somebody else's chart as well. These are different types of algorithms out there. Decision trees are popular. SVM is also popular. Bayes, there's a range of them. Clustering, etc. There's a range of different types of machine learning algorithms. We worked and did studies on a subset of these in our solution. So the challenge with supervised learning, it can be quite accurate if your training data set is broad and good and comprehensive. But baseline data sets are very hard to find in certain environments, especially in network traffic. It's not an easy problem. For some reason, it's a harder problem than one would think. Unsupervised learning is good. It's attractive to the network practitioner and security practitioner because in theory, you don't need any a priori training set. But you have to run it in a period when the network is good so that you can detect anomalies. There's a range of, I talked about the statistics and the features. There's a range of features that one can extract from traffic on the network. And the question is, which of these are useful? Because this is the most expensive, in our experience, this is the most expensive part of the operation. The computing horsepower to run the machine learning algorithms we found is not that bad. It doesn't take as long as one would think with complicated math. But to be able to extract the statistics, these features, from the raw data, either from different types of files, storage mechanisms, databases, because this is an I/O, this is I/O bound, this is the most expensive part of the operation we found. So one needs to find a feature set that marries performance with accuracy, with efficiency. I'll skip through most of this because I think I'm probably down to 1 or 2 minutes. But I was going to walk through, how we went about the exercise, for example, of going from studying different types of threats, characterizing their network behavior, using that to figure out which features would represent, and then actually applying the algorithms. The simplest kind, and you read the literature, the simplest kind of machine learning could be, well, I don't know, I look at simply the bits per second, the number of bytes generated in this network. And it generates a pattern something like this. And when I see a spike, that's an anomaly. So that's the simplest of the lot. Well, there's a lot of false positives in that. It could be somebody downloading a video. So you very quickly need to move to more sophisticated forms of features that would be used. You move into things that were presented in the previous slide. And in addition to that, there's other challenges. You need to figure out the measurement time scale. When you're putting these statistics together to feed into the algorithm, are you working on the order of minutes, hours, days, weeks? The longer you go, the more storage becomes a problem or a challenge. So then you begin to think of summarization or sampling. When you do that, you lose certain information. So this is where the academics and the optimization really have potential to help. Okay. Okay, I think this is the last slide. So we studied, in our quest to build the product that we have, we studied a number of different machine learning algorithms applied to different real-world data sets. And some of them are listed up there. There's many others that are not listed. Not all the algorithms find the same threats. Different algorithms seem to be good for finding different threats. Finding a comprehensive set of data sets so that the algorithm works from one network to another is a challenge. Because you may find that the algorithm is good, it detects threats, but it really works well in this kind of network and that kind of network, but not in this kind of network. Final comment. So I do believe that machine learning has high value in cyber threat detection, as mentioned. It's not the be-all and end-all. I'm not one of those who believes that it's the be-all and end-all. It is an important factor, and it will have more and more utility as we go forward, as the volume of security data increases. Because we need to monitor more data and more places in the network. You need to have cameras in many places, no longer just at the perimeter. And big data coupled with machine learning has the opportunity to help. IT networks by nature, the traffic is very noisy. As a user, I may go to this website, I may go to that website, I may go, you know, if you look at how the pattern is, it's all over the place. Being able to detect an anomaly or a change or something that's abnormal in very noisy traffic can be difficult. It's much easier if your traffic is a straight line and you detect it from there. So in IT networks, our experience is that the big challenge, of course, is trying to reduce the false positives that you have. The good news is that in machine-to-machine kind of networks, so SCADA or industrial control systems or IoT, Internet of Things, you know, where your fridge is talking, you know, you're remotely checking the temperature of the eggs from remotely. All these kind of IoT devices, their traffic is machine-to-machine, so it's deterministic. It's more predictable. And when you have deterministic traffic, finding anomalies or finding changes from the norm is easier. So, you know, machine learning, it works much better in certain environments than in others. And I think I better wrap up. Sorry. Thank you. I hope you found it interesting.